Welcome to the Ultimate Farm Wife podcast. On this channel, we're going to be discussing all things marrying a farmer, moving to the land, and becoming integrated with a family farming operation. Whether you're moving to the farm for the first time or whether you're moving back into a family farming operation, we discuss the ins and the outs of all of it. So let's jump into today's episode. Hi, and welcome to the farm. Today we're talking, you've married a farmer, now what? But today is going to be a little bit different because we're talking with Jennie. Jennie, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming.
Hatcha, how do you do?
Jennie, tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, and how it was you came to be on your farm.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I just turned 49, so all of a sudden I'm looking at my life in decades. My youngest child is 20. I have twins who are 22, and my eldest is nearly 25. I married a soldier when I was 22, my teen love, and we have lived all over Australia. And we've lived Darwin, Sydney, Brisbane, Perth, Canberra, and like some of those postings multiple times. So about 15 years ago, when we landed in Canberra for the first time, we started thinking more seriously about purchasing some land because we would like to retire, just relax somewhere, have a little piece of Australia for ourselves after 25 years in army housing. So we finally bought somewhere nearly 12 years ago, just outside of Canberra. And at that point, my husband started doing postings on his own because the children hit high school. And that's kind of how we ended up here in Canberra, with a few hundred acres in Bungendore, which is 30 minutes out of the CBD.
Amazing. Mm-hmm. So a few things I want to touch on there, Jennie. First of all, how was it when your husband was away on postings and it was you and the 4 kids? How did that fit into your army housing life? And then how is that different to what it is now? I know you have grown-up kids, but how does that all fit in?
So I just finished 6 years of university. I was 23, baby in my belly, and my husband's battalion was going to Darwin. So, that's a pretty big leap from Sydney, where our families were, to go to Darwin, and loved it. Absolutely fell in love with Darwin. Had our first baby, and then 10 weeks later, my husband went to his first war. So 6 deployments later, which is 2 East Timors, 3 Afghanistans, and an Iraq. Look, I'm a really independent person and loved, there was just something about motherhood that just really, it was the making of me. I absolutely thrived, regardless of education or career prospects. I just loved being a mum. I know that's not for everyone. Absolutely was for me, especially because, we had to pick up and move every 2 years to a completely different city. Sometimes we didn't know anyone. The children were always at different ages and stages. And these deployments, not only is your husband in a conflict zone, they last, I think the shortest ones were maybe 7 months and the longest ones 11. So that's a lot of time alone with your children. I thrived, and the children are so close. They're this wonderful little unit. Now they've got partners and fiancés, and, it's really gorgeous to see them all wanting to hang out as adults together. But yes, we're just a really content family unit. And yes, my husband has retired now, so I don't have to worry about any more war zones and when you leave the army, of course, you lose army housing. So we had to buy a place. And while we're waiting to build on our farm, we are living in Canberra City, actually, in a townhouse. Every experience has been so different, but we've just made the most of every single one. And yes, once the children hit high school, my husband posted to Brisbane for 3 years. He did 2 Afghanistans during that time, so he wasn't even in Australia. And then it came back to Canberra and then posted to Perth. So by that stage, I had 4 teenagers. I'm doing driving lessons. When he was in Iraq, I had twins doing driving lessons. That is a lot of hours on the road, and all 4 of them played a lot of sports. So, yes, we got to know each other very, very closely, and it was beautiful. I just loved it. And, yeah, then when my husband would come and walk in the door again, it was like he never left. And I have 3 girls first, and who's mum? They just love my husband, so that was beautiful. Yeah, and that's kind of how we rolled.
Yeah, that is absolutely beautiful. And I love that you were just able to, yep, he's home, and we just pick up and keep moving forward. I love that, because
Yeah.
I know that in itself is sometimes can be a problem area to solve with a lot of farm wives when their husbands are doing harvest, or they're doing like peak season, or having to go away contracting for a period of time, and then sometimes navigating that time of being, I'm by myself, and now we've got to work as a dual unit again. So I love hearing that was seamless for you. Do you think there was anything in particular you did to make that seamless?
Look, a lot of it is no one really talks about this very much, but you've got to have the right personality. I love my own company. Yes, I'm extroverted and I love people, and, I would think nothing of going to an event on my own. However, once I'm home with those children, and my husband deployed when our eldest was 10 weeks old, then when our twins were 9 months old, and then when our son was 2. So, that's pretty much, the pivotal ages and stages in that kind of baby end. But I don't have any resentment. And I think that is one of the absolute killers in relationships. And it is very much like you do what you have to do. But also, like, my mum was a Navy wife, and she raised 4 children, and my dad would take sea postings. And she was just always so positive about it. And yes, we would kiss a photo goodnight and saying, good night, Dad, wherever you are. So that part wasn't foreign. Yes, the army's a little bit more dangerous than the Navy. However, look, if you can maintain the love and the communication, and sure, like if you've got, like, I don't know, some issue going on and your husband's giving you advice from the other side of the world, it's not that necessarily well received. And he would often call in the middle of dinner time, and, I might have been spoon feeding twins or breastfeeding and couldn't reach the phone. And mobile phones weren't even that, practical back then. So you've just got to relax into it and accept it for what it is, and just cherish the time you are together.
Yeah. So I took away from that a bit of a mindset, just
Mhm.
preparing yourself, taking it as it is, taking those opportunities to talk to him when he is available and there.
Yes.
And I also sort of took away maybe relaxing the reins a little bit in, the structure and the coping mechanisms you may come up with when they're home, because it's not just you now.
Yes, and you're absolutely at the mercy of their time, because they might only have a few minutes every week or two to call you. So you have to drop everything. And if you're, to the point where I actually started buying Le Creuset cast iron cookware, because I needed to be able to stand up and breastfeed and cook for a family and be prepared for the phone to ring, because my day was pretty structured. I'm very disciplined, but the children were really easy. They were great. They were well behaved. They didn't want to make life difficult, and they weren't challenging children. However, if my husband called, he needed all of me. So, it's a certain, I guess, there was no room for me to have an ego during all of this time. And I was really comfortable with that. And look, self-confidence is so crucial in all of these aspects. For your children to see you behaving as a wonderful person, an example. And here we are, 27 years of marriage later, and, our children are, in wonderful relationships, but they see my husband and I still in love, still giggling, still kissing, still going out to restaurants. And, really craving our time together alone. And I think that's a really nice example. However, that was always our end game. We knew where we were going to be, hitting that late 40s, 50 mark.
Absolutely love that. Knowing where you're going to be and how you're going to get there is definitely a key to that self-confidence as well, right in the moment, and being able to reflect on, okay, it's just for the moment, it's where we are. If you're enjoying listening along with us today and learning some tips, tricks, and advice, then please like, subscribe, and even share this interview with someone who you think would need to hear this information or who might benefit from other interviews done right here on this channel. Now let's get back into today's episode. We are, sometimes our identity sometimes builds around where we are. So, and our self-confidence comes from that identity. How did you rebuild your self-confidence and identity when you moved? Do you have to do that each time? Did that come naturally?
Yes. I would say it came naturally. However, there's kind of two different army wives. There's the ones who are very involved in their husband's work. You could say, oh, what's your husband up to today? And they're like, oh, he's at this conference and he's presenting this paper and, such and such and such and such is going to be there. And you're like, okay, all I know is that my husband's not coming home for dinner. Like that's my, I wasn't trying to manage his career at all. And I mean, honestly, there are ways so much. How do you even keep up? Look, I had my babies young. My fourth child came along just as I turned 29. I had so much energy, so much kind of curiosity as well. So yes, I would go to army functions, and once I had a baby on my hip, it was a lot better. It was like this access to all areas. People would chat to you, they'd talk to your child and then start talking to you. But there was also the division of the officers' wives and the enlisted men, so non-commissioned officers, senior non-commissioned officers. So we had all four of our babies while my husband was a corporal. So that's a completely different mess club where they eat and drink, different wives, different groups. And some of the wives live by that. And it's just not my thing at all. So I never forced myself to be in those situations because when the first time my husband went overseas and I had this, 2-month-old baby on my hip, these wives came over and were like, oh, hello, who are you? And all of this. And I mean, this is 1999, just to give you a bit of a time warp. And they said, oh, what does your husband do? And I said, oh, he's a section commander. And this is in mechanized personnel carriers. And they were like, oh, he's a corporal. Oh, no. You need to go over there. That's your place over there. And I was just thinking, I've just done 6 years of university. I've got this gorgeous baby. And I'd actually gone back to work as well because, what else was I going to do with a husband away and the world's easiest baby? And yeah, I just thought, oh, yeah, I don't think this is going to be for me. I think I might just stick to my own little tune. And then I eventually found other wives that I would meet at completely unrelated, events or preschool or whatever. And there were so many of us out there who were like, oh, yes, no, we don't go to those functions. Some of those women's live and breathe for them, not for us. We'll just have our own little gang, completely disconnected to the fact that our husbands, and I'm talking, commanding officers of battalions and their wives were like, I can do the pleasantries, but I can't wear my husband's rank. I just want to be able to say, Jenny, would you like to bring the children over to our pool for a swim? And it's real friendship.
Yeah, I loved that. Finding your people within the community where you are. Yes. And not trying to be someone you're not, really sticking to where you feel comfortable and, making things easy, essentially, isn't it? Finding people who you can be at ease with, yes, where you don't have to change or be someone you're not. And I love that you were able to find that, Jenny.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I picked up, I'd say, one fabulous army wife at each posting, and we still catch up now. Almost all of our husbands have retired now, and we're just living these fabulous lives with grown children. We're looking at our 50s and just like, what's next?
Yeah, absolutely. And changing gears a little bit, Jenny. So you knew that you wanted a little piece of Australia to yourself, and now you're on this beautiful regenerative ag place. You can call yourself first generation farmers. Talk me through the process of buying the land, the time, the timeline between when you purchased the block, when you built, when you moved to the block. Tell me how that scene looks, because so many of us are, sometimes, coming into ag for the first time, or we're leaving a family farming operation and thinking, how are we going to do this? How do people start a farm? So tell me about that journey, Jenny.
Yes, and I really appreciate being on these rural podcasts as a first-time farmer as well, because when we landed in Canberra, we thought, okay, this seems like a really great place. Our families were in Sydney at the time, and we thought, well, that's not too far away. It's only 3 hours. Let's have a look around 50 kilometres from the CBD and see where we might find some property. And in that time, my husband moved to Brisbane and posted to Afghanistan twice, and then came back. We had children in private school. So it was a whole different world by the time we actually purchased the farm. We had to come up with 75 or 80% deposit because the banks don't like things over 20 acres. And we found 300. So we were looking for 50 to 100, found 300. Fabulous, more or less derelict. And we just had this regenerative vibe that we wanted to take the farm that no one else wanted. And we sold our investment properties. So we had the cash ready to go, which was great. So we had all this kind of lined up. And we started with the do no more harm, start where you are with what you have. We bought a tractor. You go to clearing sales and you can get some fencing wire and a ride-on lawnmower, and you start accumulating all of these things. And the property is a soldier settler from the Second World War, and it came with a shearing shed as well. So we had a bit of room for storage. I know it's the original one from the 1950s. And then in 2016, we put up a barn. So we just we took it very slowly. My husband was in infantry, so he knows landscape. And the best advice, and we listened to it as well, was don't rush in. Don't just, build immediately. As it turns out, and then my husband had another deployment to Iraq, we ended up hitting a massive biodiversity snag for all of our beautiful work. We had to basically put tens of thousands of dollars into biodiversity assessment reports, flora and fauna reports, because in between buying our farm and putting in a DA, the government had put a covenant on our farm because it's a pristine example of a snow gum remnant temperate grassland. Yes, so no one told us, and that happened 5 years after we bought. 3 years later, we're trying to do a DA. It's the pandemic, all of these things. Delay. My husband discharges from the army. That's why we had to quickly buy something in Canberra. And we're actually set to start building in January. So we're still building the original homestead that we wanted to. However, it's just taken a little bit longer. However, we'll be off-grid for financial purposes and the distance from the road, et cetera, and the fact that it'll be wonderful to be off-grid, on our own EnviroCycle, sewerage, rainwater, the works. However, in the meantime, because it's been nearly 12 years, we have had ecologists, conservationists, environmentalists, everyone come across our farm, and this is all in reporting that we've restored critically endangered ecological communities. And these are all the things that were going against us for wanting to build one house on 300 acres. But now it's going to just be, exactly what we want it to be, chemical-free. We're going to look at some Indigenous relationships with the local communities. All of these things, I believe, are part of the whole regenerative farming vibe. Conservation, tree planting, trees on hills, cell grazing, you name it, all of these wonderful things. But most importantly, are we happy? because what's the point in doing any of this if we're not happy? We're also in a different financial position now where our fourth child's in his third year out of school, so there's not school fees and those kinds of things. So we've kind of come around the backward way. However, with a lot of patience and a lot of things going on in our personal life, we are where we are, and that's where we're meant to be right now. And there's no point in fighting that. You've just got to go with it.
Yeah, absolutely, Jenny. And a beautiful journey that you've taken. And I really like talking about, the time frame that it takes for things to fall into place and to really work with, because particularly in agriculture, when we are looking at something big like buying our first place or investing, a lot of people can feel very overwhelmed with the work that we've got to get done.
Yes.
And I like breaking that down into smaller bite-sized pieces. And also, things in agriculture take so much longer than you can ever imagine.
Absolutely.
And I think that's why sometimes, farmers in particular get like that relaxed sense around them, because it's going to take the time it's going to take. That doesn't mean that we're not being efficient, doesn't mean we're not being lazy, doesn't mean we're not reaching targets, but sometimes it takes as long as it's going to take. So I love that we're able to break that time frame down. In supporting this podcast and YouTube channel, we want to make sure that you are not going home empty-handed. Not only will you be getting tips, tricks, and advice from our stories and from our content that we're putting out that will help you move to the farm for the first time, whether you're becoming a farmer for the first time, marrying a farmer and moving to the land, or whether you are a multi-generational farmer looking for advice, tips, and advice that you will find within these interviews and the content. Continue to support the channel by purchasing Tupperware using the link below. Tupperware helps you in the kitchen and down the paddock. Whether you are looking at food storage, kitchenware, servingware, items for the kids, lunchboxes, or whether you're wanting to be eco-friendly minded, then check out Tupperware using the link below and selecting Karcher Williams as your consultant at checkout. That will help support this podcast and you get Tupperware in return. So thanks, guys. Let's jump back into today's interview. I do want to go back to a little bit of the earlier journey, because you did have to find a lot of the percentage down payment early on. I think you said 70 to 80%.
Yes.
So when you were looking at buying into land, you thought, okay, so we need some smaller bite-sized pieces to get that equity up front, to get that money up front, to be able to buy our piece of land. So tell me about the forethought of that. We're going into ag, we've got to set ourselves up. Let's do some bite-sized financial pieces. So tell me about that.
Right. Well, way back when before our baby was 1, we bought our first investment property. Just happened to be an apartment on the Esplanade in Darwin, which is a beautiful strip along the harbour. And we just held on to that for a really, really long time. And eventually the market was changing a lot in Darwin with mining, and the boom was about to come off. So we sold that, I guess, 12 years later, because our daughter was 12, 13 when we bought the farm. So, and we had other investment properties as well. But that first one, I mean, you're 25 years old with a mortgage and a husband that's not earning necessarily a lot of money, but man, that forced savings, it's very humbling. I'm very simple, and I was working between having our first daughter and the twins. So we had 2 incomes, although modest back in the 90s. I've always made everything from scratch. I breastfed, I used cloth nappies, I made all the children's food from 2 aspects, budget, but also minimal waste. And that's just how you live. We still managed to take the children on a couple of overseas holidays. However, we've just always lived within our means. No alcohol, no cigarettes, no kind of wasting money on frivolous things. And, and back then I did love fashion. So, but, we lived, but we were sensible. And so, by the time we go to buy the farm, and my husband had done a couple of recent Afghanistan deployments. So that's a cash cow, because when they're overseas, they're also getting paid US dollar danger money, and it's foreign income earned overseas, so they are not taxed here in Australia. So there were some years where he had a tiny income, or he would have done a deployment straddling 2 financial years, throw in 4 children, and the government's like, wow, you people are really poor. So, we were just sensible with our money. And, and that's also sending them to beautiful schools as well. But that was how we raised the money to get that 75, 80% deposit. And the funny thing is, the second you've got that deposit and the bank gives you the balance, you buy the property, you can then borrow $35,000 to put a road in, So it's really silly. It's really silly how it works. And then we borrowed against the mortgage to put a 5-bay barn up, But yeah, it is how it is. But forced savings and investment properties, that's how we did it, because we weren't in a position to buy a house to live in and then keep upgrading, because we were crisscrossing Australia from, one state or territory to the other.
I think you dropped out then. To repeat for me, the last little bit after the five bay barn.
Oh, okay. So 5-bay barn. Oh, yes, properties worked for us because we weren't able to buy a property to live in as a family and then sell and upgrade, and work the market, because we were crisscrossing Australia from one state or territory to the next.
That is a brilliant way to do it. And I really love that you broke that down for us into the more deep dive of living within the means and having that forced savings. And I really loved that you mentioned no waste, cooking from scratch, and you already had the basics of that regenerative farming and those principles and living off grid, because they're exactly what you need where you are now on your place. So, and that works in beautifully with the regeneration. So why that technique in particular? I know that sort of is your vibe, and I can pick that up through us chatting as well as seeing what you're up to on Instagram. But also, tell us about, you finally got the place, you're doing the diversification. Day to day, Jenny, what do you find yourself doing? How do you love what you do? So share that passion with us.
Look, I actually had older parents when I was born in 1975. My parents were already in their 40s. So they were actually born in the Depression. And they still, and I'm talking, we lived in a beautiful 6-bedroom home on the North Shore of Sydney, and we all went to private schools. My parents still had dripping in the fridge as this kind of little hold on just in case you ever ran out of food thing, which we thought was normal, but, and we would go to Europe every other year, if not every single Christmas, because my mummy was English. So we had this wonderful lifestyle. Yet my parents were just very sensible with their money. Dad was in the Navy. Mum was a housewife. Dad actually retired when I was 6. So I'm the product of 2 stay-at-home parents. And my husband always says they loved me too much and didn't smack me enough. So I've just always had the responsibility for providing for my own family to feed them. And gosh, back then I used to make their own clothes as well. Not in the full, Von Trapp homesteading style, but, in Darwin, there weren't many shops and you needed light cotton clothes. And half the time they were just in a big cloth nappy and a singlet. But yes, why would you not want to know the provenance of your food, make it from scratch with as few additives and preservatives as possible? Packaging is just ridiculous. And not like in this kind of, anti-vax control what goes in our mouths kind of vein that a lot of regenerative farmers do go down. My background's pharmacology, so my life was going to be drugs. However, if my children were ever ill, I fixed everything with a heat pack or a cold pack. We kept things very, very simple, and gosh, it reflected in their health as well. They all went on to be like, state champions in multiple sports, but we just had this quiet calm that we could always provide for ourselves. And that was, and some houses, all we could do were grow our own herbs. But if that was just that little piece of having our hands in the soil, that's where it all stems from. So yes, amazing childhood. Had a mother that washed plastic bags and then would drive us to private school, like just this wasteful mindset was just never part of, my culture.
If you're enjoying listening along with us today and learning some tips, tricks, and advice from our ladies, then please like, subscribe, and even share this interview with someone who you think would need to hear this information or who might benefit from other interviews done right here on this channel. Now let's get back into today's episode.
Yeah. And then, Jenny, so you're on farm now. What do your days look like? I know when I was chatting with you the other day, you were putting in a row of trees and you'd just finished, I think, doing something with the compost. So, your days are so different now to what they were previously. Did you just relax into your farming principles and way, or was there stepping stones that you had to go through to be there?
Well, we're still living in Canberra and we're building. We haven't built yet, so we're not actually living on the farm. However, it is my full-time job and my husband's fully retired. So yes, my latest thing is growing a lot of trees from cuttings. So I'm always putting in trees. We've put in thousands of trees. Acorns, they're fantastic. Throw them in strategic places and get some oaks going. So with all of this and native, because we are native grasslands, we're not seeded or anything like that. And we use Biodynamics, which bring out seeds and grasses and plants that may not have been seen for 50 years. And we've got evidence of that now as well. However, it doesn't always have to be natives. You can throw some exotics in there. The natives are regenerating themselves tenfold. It's amazing. There are saplings everywhere. All of the woodlands are connecting up. So I'm working on some exotics like poplars, for example. They work really well with cuttings. You put them along your boundaries, and during a bushfire, they can actually mist and create an actual water barrier for your farm. And there's also a lot of evidence that bushfires will skip over a biodynamic farm because the soil and everything's so hydrated and so healthy. So, probably like, buying that investment property way back in our early 20s, it's future-proofing, it's planning. And, I'm more of a free spirit and positive and optimistic that everything works out. My husband is an analyst and has been faced with, horrible things in his life. And that's, his whole world was life and death until 18 months ago. So the two of us together make a pretty good team to plan, get things done, well executed, but also very enjoyable. So for us, it's only 40 minutes from the CBD to the farm. I go out there a few times a week, and I often stay overnight just to keep, the kilometres down and the productivity up. And we are still working on the soil, building topsoil, mulching, spreading biodynamics, spreading biologicals. None of this costs a lot of money. And there's nothing better than making your own weed tea because there's a particular weed in an area that is thriving. So make a weed tea out of that and the soil will thank you for it. And that's what we're seeing now, after 12 years of being chemical free, the soil is really thanking us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It just sounds like you've got these beautiful days that you've planned for, and you've just really so glad that you are there. And I love hearing the different side of agriculture that comes with regeneration, because it's a completely different mindset and definitely suits a lot of different personalities. When I'm talking to a lot of farmers and farm wives, there's definitely different mindsets that go with the different type of agriculture that you find yourself in, and being able to line yourself with, you know, your mindset and your parameters and where you want to be.
Yes.
It's just so beautiful, and I love hearing about that process and how different that can be to traditional farming. And because that system doesn't work for everybody. And when we were talking earlier about that self-confidence and your self-identity, if you can work that back into your family farming operation, then, you know, that's where you find comfort. That's where you find confidence and passion. And sometimes when you're moving into a family farming operation for the first time, it's finding where you fit in the system, because sometimes we don't fit into the system that's there. So I really loved hearing your story and how over a stretch of 14 years, you've been able to get to where you are.
And look, the privilege of not needing our land and needing to mine it to make an income, that's not lost on us. We are very much aware of that. We are surrounded by industrial farmers who, you know, do use, they've got, you know, thousands of head of sheep. They're, you know, chemical contractors and sprayers, and, you know, they are very polite with us, and you learn other things from them as well, whether it's animal husbandry or what, you know, how they've experienced the land. They've very much accepted my husband because he is a soldier. A lot of them, their fathers or grandfathers were soldiers. So that was kind of like our little in, that we're not just these people from the city who are going to try and tell them what to do. We just go about doing our own thing very quietly and humbly. And, you know, they actually appreciate the biologicals that are drifting over their fence and tidying up their fence lines too.
I love that very much. So Jenny, if someone is moving to the farm for the first time, whether they are trying to purchase their own block, whether they are first generation farmers, or whether they're just trying to find their self-confidence and their belonging on farm, what is your advice, tips and tricks for them?
Look, I would say a lot of research. Like, you might become an expert on organic farming, say. That is not necessarily going to be well received by everybody around you. So just think about the kind of holistic context of where you're approaching things from, and read the room. You know, you work on the people who are interested, the people who are nodding and, you know, interested in your journey. Don't feel like you are the stereotype, that they might think, oh, you know, it's city money, or these first-time farmers have no idea. You know, just kind of like be honest with yourself. Maybe you don't, but maybe you also come without prejudice. Maybe you also come without this mindset that unfortunately a lot of farmers have, where they're almost addicted to debt, which is not something I've ever heard anyone say out loud. And it's sad. What other industries have you under such restraints by the bank? When, yes, it's feast and famine with harvests and, you know, cattle sales or whatever, but where's the financial planning and responsibility in farming? And sure, look, we've done it without having to look at boarding school fees and things like that. However, it can be as simple as, you know, any purchase. Regenerative farming is one of the more brilliant options, because it's very much start where you are with what you have, and then start thinking slowly. We just have a really small little 85 horsepower tractor that we don't actually use very often. We do a lot more on the ag bikes and quad bikes, because you don't need a lot of machinery. So think about what kind of farming you want to do, and don't rush into anything. The climate and the weather, you can't fight it. You have to work in harmony with that. And if that's planning for hydrating your farm rather than draining your farm, for example, that's what you need to research, and that's what you need to do. And don't worry about what anyone else is doing around you. And just, yeah, really just be humble and just, you know, nod and smile. And there might be someone that, you know, has horrific animal husbandry techniques that you would never agree with, but you're friends with the wife, and you can separate those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Jenny, that is absolutely brilliant. I have loved our chat today. I have taken a lot away from it, and I know that the Rural Mum community will as well. So thank you so much for being on here today.
I'm loving your podcast because they're all so different. Every story is so different, and I'm thoroughly enjoying them.
Yeah, they are, and that's of the diversity, and I love that every episode has those different tips, tricks, and advice that you can pull from. And whether you align with one episode, you may not align with another, and that's okay as well. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jenny.